Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of Cruel and Beautiful, Eye of the Dragon, Rabbit Hole, and King Dio. With the recent release of, recent being July, with the somewhat recent release of The Great Ace Attorney on Nintendo Switch in English for the first time ever, it really inspired me to go back and read the classic Holmes stories. And by inspired, I mean it made me realize how much of a fan I am of classic Holmes, and it really motivated me to go back and start reading them again. And I can already tell you, I am enjoying reading the original Holmes stories a lot more than any of these modern adaptations or take on the character, including The Great Ace Attorney. My suggestion to you, if you're a fan of The Great Ace Attorney, if you do like Ace Attorney, if you do like what they did with The Great Ace Attorney, read the originals, because it will give you a lot of context as to some of the character decisions they made and some of the deviations from the source material. There are a lot, but there are a lot of moments in The Great Ace Attorney that do refer to Holmes continuity and lore, and I really wanted to I'm not sure how much of the Ace Attorney fandom is invested in the Holmes in the Holmes fandom, so I thought I would take a little bit of time to talk about each individual story as I go through them and talk about their historical significance, my personal thoughts, and things like that. And of course, I bought an entire collection of Holmes on Kindle for $2, so they're very affordable, very easy to pick up, very easy to obtain, and I do recommend them. I do think they hold up for a wide range of reasons. I think they're good they're a good period piece. I think they do a really good job of showing you what life was like back in the 1880s in London in that time period. They do a great job establishing the character of Holmes, and they're just interesting, good reads, even if they're somewhat mediocre. A Study in Scarlet is unfortunately is. Now, A Study in Scarlet is very important to the history of Holmes, in spite of not being all that much of a good mystery, because this is the story that established Sherlock Holmes as a concept, and that's the thing that really resonates very strongly with me as I read it again, because I found the first bit of this, Watson being introduced, establishing how he met Holmes, how he came across his powers of deduction, how he emphasized it, how he describes Holmes' abilities as a detective, his personality, his quirks, his personal habits. I found all of that to be extremely engaging. I found myself shocked, positively shocked, at how so many of the iconic Holmes things, the things everybody knows knows and respects the character for, were established so early on, within the first couple of pages in the very first Holmes story ever. That seems, the character of Sherlock Holmes himself and his and the supporting cast of Watson, of the detectives, resonate so strongly even now. You can kind of tell that even back then, Arthur Conan Doyle had a very, very clear vision for how the Holmes formula would typically play out. You have Sherlock Holmes being introduced to a problem with a unique sort of setup that sort of baffles the police, and with his unique powers of deduction, goes through the problem and resolves it in a way that no one else really could, right? Because he's able to discern certain aspects of the case that removes the professional that eludes professional investigation. And this goes beyond simply having acute powers of observation like it's typically depicted in other popular media. One of the things that I think has been kind of forgotten in pop culture, or at least not discussed as often as Sherlock's personality and general characteristics, is just how much work he puts into his craft. Sherlock Holmes does a lot. Is an academic who spends a lot of his time studying crime scenes, criminal psychology, and chemistry, right? Like he's established as someone who spends a lot of time like learning the differences between like different types of tobacco smoke. Someone who like really goes deep in like the nitty gritty of like all his craft. Someone who really understands like how things will affect like how things like relate to one another, how people like in London typically behave, the going-ons in the city, how events will play out, and he's able to sort of like piece it all together in like an incredibly intricate way. And that's you see this play out in the novel beautifully well, right? Like Watson. This is actually the novel where Watson first meets Holmes. He returns from Afghanistan after being injured in the war. Some things never change, and he's living in London. He's poor as fuck, and he meets one of his old friends, and he introduces him to Holmes. Right, like Stanford. This guy, someone he knows, is just like, yeah, I know someone else who's looking for a roommate. He's kind of a weird guy, but you know, if you want, I'll introduce you. And so like that's how Holmes and Watson sort of meet, right? And Watson, you know, by being associated with Holmes, like being near him and like observing him and sort of like trying to understand like his new roommate, like gets dragged into a study in Scarlet, right? The plot of the novel, and this character, like this story, like establishes Watson's character as well. Again, like people don't give Watson enough credit, I think, for what he brings to the Holmes saga, because like he's a straight man, right? Like he is an ordinary, exceptional person who is able to appreciate Holmes's personality and quirks. Like most people, I think, would find Holmes to be kind of standoffish or kind of arrogant, kind of condescending, kind of ridiculous, kind of autistic. I would say that's been a topic that's been a subject I've been thinking about going through this, is just how much of a fucking spurg Holmes is in this. Most people would be rather put off by this, but like Watson, being much more educated than the common person, being much more tolerant and able to like willing to like accept Holmes for who he is, quickly realizes that Holmes is a fucking savant in his field. He goes beyond simply being a genius. He is incredible, and Watson is able to sort of like document Holmes's process and get the general idea of how Holmes is able to get his process across. And even in this original story, Watson is quite a bit of offers quite a bit of a benefit to this. A lot of bit of like his own professional expertise in this case. He's able to like he is of course a doctor and is able to examine people involved in the case, and like is able to realize, oh wait, this guy is going to die soon, which is you know, an important critical aspect that really ties everything together. Watson is a straight man. He serves his purpose to sort of emphasize to the audience just like how exceptional Holmes actually is. He is an integral part of the experience. You can't have Holmes without Watson. It's an essential part as to what makes the character work. And reading this again, I found myself like very interested in seeing Watson meet Holmes for the first time, seeing them start to understand each other, and as the story goes on, become friends. Like I said, this established the Holmes formula exceptionally well very early on. Now, that is a very good positive aspect to the story. It's absolutely worth reading if you're a hardcore fan of Holmes. Like, if you're interested in the character, the history, like how things developed and stuff like that, this is a must-read, right? Like, you will be interested in that aspect of the plot. But, and this is a very, very big but, the mystery itself is not all that interesting, not all that compelling, and not all that engaging, especially like the middle part of it. The plot, which involves a couple of wealthy, evil Mormons who have been killed by this guy who is seeking revenge on them. It's so insipid and stupid and just kind of not at all creative. It just kind of leaves an empty feeling in your mouth, right? Especially because in the middle part there's an extended flashback sequence explaining oh yeah there are these American settlers who get lost in the desert, and then they become Mormons, and then they convert to Mormonism after being rescued by passing by a settlement, a convoy of them, and then the girl. Yeah, and then the girl gets forced into a harem for one of the elder sons, and then they try to leave, and then they get fucked up, and then the guy who wanted to marry her it's seeks revenge on the guy who killed them. It has the elements for a Holmes story. It has an interesting place in American history. It has interesting antagonists. It has it's misleading initially. You have all these aspects to it, but the thing that really makes this not work, and one of the reasons I think Holmes works better as a short story, in a short story format, is that you really don't need to see the flashback sequence to get an idea for what's going on. All you could legit take that entire section out of the story and just have the guy explain why he did it at the end, and that's all you need. That's all you need. The Holmes formula is here and it's functional, but it's bloated. It has a lot of elements that's unnecessary, that are kind of boring. These other characters don't have nearly the same amount of heart and soul put into them. In fact, I found them kind of boring, actually. I was kind of shocked at the sheer decline in quality in between acts, right? You get Holmes actually, the pacing to this is really weird, because what happens is that Holmes actually catches the villain very, very early on, and the entire second half of the novel is him explaining why. Is the guy who did it explaining why he did it, and it's just a good chunk of it just is not all that interesting. I'm not sure if he was going for a subversion, if he was trying to emphasize how quickly Holmes can pick up on these kind of cases. I don't know if he just didn't have the formula established perfectly yet, but what I see here is just a novel, is just a really, really good idea that is not quite polished to what it would turn into being. It has the elements as to what would make Holmes a great character, but reading this, I can 100% see why Holmes did not initially take off. For those of you who aren't aware, that Sherlock Holmes began as a character in a couple of novels, right? I believe A Study in Scarlet and The Sign of Four, and it wasn't until the series transitioned into a short story format that it suddenly started taking off and becoming super, super big among its audience. And I'll have to look into the history of that, because I'm not too well read up on the deep lore of how on how that happened, but I do find it interesting, and I do think I'm going to learn more about it in the future. I have been listening to a little bit of audiobooks going over the history of the character and stuff like that. There are lots of interesting tidbits about this. Sherlock Holmes is one of the greatest English literary characters, for a good reason. I think there's so many aspects to this character that have just endured for over a century now, and I think will continue for forever, right? For as long as English speaking culture exists. So probably for the next 5 years. I thought the novel was worth reading. I'm such a big fan of Holmes that even though I wasn't crazy about the story or the plot or the setting, I found myself I found myself really engaged with just saying that oh yeah, this is how Holmes got started. This is the very first Sherlock Holmes story. And when you look at it from that perspective, like, yeah, it is a respectable first effort. Now, it wouldn't have been successful in its own right. It didn't light the world on fire right away. But as the series continued, as it continued like expanding with new ideas, like with the follow up, the Sign of Four, with like the short stories, like it really started gaining steam. And this is a really good life lesson for those of you, people like myself, who are creative, who haven't had like major success yet. Is that good ideas don't necessarily take off right away. They're going to need time to be refined and really start to become popular among your target audience. And that's kind of how I look at this, is that like the story itself is not great, but the idea was great, the characters were great, and because the characters were designed with this sort of mindset that like, oh yeah, Holmes goes out and solves mysteries like this all the time, that leads a really wide opening for essentially an endless series of plots going forward. Ones that I think Sherlock Holmes continued for 30 years after this. This was published in 1888, I think, 1880. So I think it continued until 1918, 1925, maybe 45 years. I'll have to look at the dates, but like this character, one of literature's most popular figures. This is how he got started, and there's something really, truly fascinating about that.